Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a subject that it really cuts right to the heart of what identity and community mean in one of the world's oldest, most diverse civilizations.
It really does. And our source material for this deep dive, it paints this initial picture, almost an idyllic one, of India.
Right. A land where diversity wasn't just, tolerated, but it was actively celebrated. It was known for this almost radical commitment to coexistence.
And it's the cultural calendar that truly defines this image. We're talking about those incredible shared moments of collective joy.
Diwali, Eid, Christmas.
Ganesh Chaturthi, Navratri, Gurpurab. For centuries, these festivals were the very rhythm of civil life. They were the cultural high points that acted as social binding agents, unifying neighbors across all different faiths.
That's the foundation. That's the image we all hold. But here is the central paradox the source material lays out right at the start, and it's a jarring contrast.
It really is.
Instead of that shared joy, that procession of celebration, today, when a major festival arrives, we frequently see organized protests. We see targeted vandalism, outbreaks of outright hostility.
It's like the expectation has shifted from joy to tension.
Exactly. We are seeing these events, which are meant to renew community bonds, transform almost instantly from moments of celebration into cultural flashpoints.
It is a devastating transformation to observe, and our mission today is to move beyond the headlines. We really need to dissect the mechanisms of this change.
We have to.
We must understand exactly what is fracturing India's cultural life and, perhaps more importantly, try to calculate the immense, long-term societal cost of this loss.
So this deep dive is really about asking and trying to answer the ultimate question the source poses. What has happened to this civilization? And more specifically, what has happened to the culture of celebration itself.
And that initial framing is so crucial. It's essential for you, for our listeners, to understand that this isn't simply a political skirmish or, a conflict between two specific organized groups.
No, it's deeper than that.
It's much deeper. The text makes it very clear that this phenomenon signifies a foundational cultural erosion, a culture losing its basic ingrained ability to simply coexist peacefully.
I think that's such an important distinction to make right up front. The source asserts that India's core strength has never been uniformity. It wasn't about enforcing a single way of life or a single way to celebrate.
No, not at all. Its historical power, its longevity through, millennia of invasions and political upheaval, was rooted in what the text calls plurality with dignity.
Plurality with dignity. Let's break that down.
Well, plurality just means difference. It accepts difference as a given, but dignity, that's the key part. Dignity means respecting that difference. It means providing the social and the legal space for every cultural expression to flourish without fear.
So in the festivals, which are really the most visible symbols of that plurality, when they're attacked, it's a signal.
It's a massive signal. It signals that the dignity part of that equation is now fundamentally under threat.
And that concept, plurality with dignity, that has to be the metric we use throughout this deep dive because it's the high standard by which we can measure the current loss. Okay, moving into section 1, we have to confront the immediate and visible crisis. Festivals turning into flashpoints. We have to look at the disturbing facts that have sadly become commonplace, marking this distinct and I would say dramatic shift away from shared celebration and decisively toward confrontation.
And when you look at the raw data of these incidents, what stands out isn't randomness. It's not just random fights. It's the intentional, calculated targeting of the celebratory act itself.
I think that's a key piece of the analysis. The acts described in the source aren't just, random outbursts of drunken aggression or something.
No, they are specific, often coordinated actions designed to interrupt or to intimidate the public display of faith and celebration. We're moving from, say, disagreements over civic logistics like traffic or noise, to explicit attempts to undermine the celebratory ritual itself.
It's about asserting dominance over public space. So let's detail those specific examples from the source material because they really define the scope of this crisis. The first, and maybe the most visible, is religious processions being stopped or attacked.
Yes.
This is the movement of faith, the public display of devotion and joy being treated as an offensive advance instead of what it is, a traditional, customary cultural act.
And we really need to understand the function of a procession. It isn't just a parade with floats. It is an organized, collective, often ancient ritual.
Okay.
Its purpose is to share devotion, to bring the deity or the sacred message out into the public sphere, making the streets part of the temple, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it.
And when that communal, traditional movement is met with confrontation, whether it's through stone pelting, roadblocks, or organized counter-protests, it instantly shifts the atmosphere. It transforms a moment of shared spiritual reverence into a high-stakes perceived aggression.
So what does that do to the community that's just trying to plan the festival? I mean, this psychological impact must be huge.
It forces them to factor in constant security risks just to perform a customary act of faith. The celebration becomes synonymous with vulnerability.
Right.
The text highlights how organizers must now negotiate routes, times, and security measures, not just with the police, which is normal, but effectively with the groups determined to oppose them. That is a massive tax on cultural freedom.
Beyond the processions, we also see the issue of decorations being torn down purely on the grounds of claims of offense.
This is what the source suggests is the weaponization of offense. Think about the sheer simplicity of it. Decorating a street, a neighborhood square, or a home.
It's a universal thing.
It's a universally joyful, aesthetic expression of celebration. But when that decoration, a flag, a string of lights, a symbol, is labeled as offensive, it signals a massive increase in social insecurity and ideological fragility.
People are actively looking for reasons to be offended.
Yes, they are seeking reasons to be offended by someone else's joy. And the moment that joy is curtailed, the moment the lights come down, the aggressors achieve a victory of psychological dominance.
It's an attempt to erase the visibility of the other, to make them invisible.
Precisely. Visibility is power in public life. And by attacking these low-cost, high-visibility cultural markers like decorations, one group attempts to dictate whose culture is allowed to be visible in the shared public space.
And it's a corrosive tactic.
Incredibly corrosive because it forces the celebrating community to withdraw, to lower the lights, put away the symbols, and retreat, which is the exact opposite of what a vibrant culture should be doing.
We also have to address the vandalization of stores based on identity or symbolism. This moves the cultural conflict squarely into the economic sphere. Businesses are targeted not for their prices or their service, but for the identity of their owners or the religious symbols they display, particularly around a major religious occasion.
And this is a devastating tactic because it links your economic livelihood directly to ideological conformity. If a shop owner understands that displaying a certain religious name, an image, or a symbol will invite a financial boycott or hostility, or even outright vandalism during a festival season,
They're going to self-censor.
of course they will. They might not celebrate publicly, or they might change their business practices entirely just to survive. This forces economic choices based on fear, not on the market.
It's a localized commercial form of coercion.
Absolutely. And the source emphasizes that this withdrawal is the most insidious step. When a community withdraws from public visibility, from economic exchange, and from shared space, the path towards segregation becomes very clear.
They are effectively choosing to exist in separate, hostile economies and separate hostile geographies.
Exactly.
And finally, the source highlights public holidays and celebrations themselves being questioned, targeted, or politicized. Days that are meant to unify the nation are treated as political ammunition.
This is where the political framing becomes so crucial. Public holidays are supposed to be civic glue. They're moments where the entire nation, regardless of faith, recognizes the significance of a major cultural or spiritual event for a segment of its population.
It's a gesture of inclusion.
It should be. But when the validity of that shared day of rest or reflection is constantly challenged, it communicates that the identity being celebrated is not fundamentally valued by the nation as a whole. It transforms that gesture of inclusion into a point of contention.
So if we synthesize all this, processions attacked, symbols destroyed, businesses targeted, what does your analysis, based on the source, suggest is the core purpose behind all of this?
My synthesis, guided by the source material, is that these incidents signify a clear transition. Festivals that were traditionally bridges of mutual understanding are actively being turned into battlefields of ideology, identity, and insecurity.
That's the core tragedy.
It is. When a shared cultural celebration is framed as a zero-sum conflict, where one group's joy is inherently framed as another group's loss or offense, the foundational strength of plurality with dignity is irrevocably damaged. Dignity needs space, and that space is being systematically closed off.
So the act of celebrating is no longer just a spiritual expression.
No. Tragically, it's becoming an act of political assertion.
And the cycle just continues because that assertion then invites the counter-assertion, escalating the conflict perpetually. Okay, so if the street violence and the vandalism are the visible, immediate symptoms of this sickness, Section 2 forces us to look inward at the slow, pervasive damage. the deeper societal and economic impact.
Yes.
And the source argues really compellingly here that the real damage occurs not on the streets, but inside people's minds.
This internal damage is the silent, pervasive cost that will outlive any broken statue or burned vehicle. It's the erosion of the social fabric at the most fundamental level.
It's the long-term damage.
It is. We are talking about the long-term negative programming of the next generation, which is perhaps the gravest cost of all.
Let's focus on that, the impact on the next generation. The text details that children grow up learning division instead of respect, and youth absorb anger instead of curiosity. I mean, this is staggering to even think about. Culture is meant to transmit wisdom and shared history. But if the primary lesson children absorb from a festival is who the enemy is, or which streets you can't walk down, the civilizational future is profoundly compromised.
Well, the primary function of early socialization, whether it happens at home or school or out on the streets during a festival, is to teach a child how to successfully navigate their society.
Right. How to be a person in the world.
Exactly. And if the social lesson of a major holiday is fear, suspicion, or hostility towards your neighbor, then those negative traits become ingrained. They become normal, expected cultural reflexes.
And this is vital. The source says respect requires curiosity.
It does. The open-minded desire to know and appreciate the other. Anger, however, is simplifying. It's lazy, it eliminates nuance, it collapses complexity into easy targets.
So when anger becomes the default cultural response,
Intellectual and emotional rigidity follows. It makes any future reconciliation incredibly difficult.
so the child grows up with an inventory of grievances and prohibitions rather than an openness to tradition. And this naturally leads directly to the breakdown of community trust, which is the next key point. The source notes this visible shift. Communities stop talking and start suspecting each other. Dialogue, which is the essence of democracy and diversity, it just vanishes.
Trust is the cheapest yet most vital piece of infrastructure a society can build. It allows commerce, social interaction, and political compromise to function efficiently.
Without it, everything grinds to a halt.
Or it becomes incredibly expensive. When trust collapses, every transaction, every casual interaction becomes cautious, measured, and potentially antagonistic.
And when people stop talking,
They don't leave a void. They fill that silence with assumptions, and those assumptions are invariably the worst-case scenarios about the motives of the other group.
and this suspicion doesn't just poison one relationship, it creates a systemic toxicity. Generalized anxiety replaces local familiarity.
Exactly. Neighbors who have lived side by side for decades suddenly see each other, not as individuals, not as Ramesh or Fatima, but as representatives of a hostile collective. That level of systemic suspicion poisons everything, making communal repair exponentially harder because every attempt at outreach is viewed through this lens of distrust.
We must also try to quantify this damage by looking at the economic consequences, the tangible costs when harmony breaks down.
Right.
The text outlines 3 immediate areas of pain. Businesses lose customers, local economies suffer when celebrations shut down, and tourism weakens when fear replaces festivity.
And let's elaborate on this economic pain because it always hits the most vulnerable people the hardest. Festivals are massive economic engines, particularly for the informal sector.
You mean the small vendors, the street sellers?
Exactly. Think of the millions of small vendors, the seasonal artisans, the decorators, the local transport services, the flower sellers. Their livelihoods depend entirely on the robust, fearless public celebration of these events. So when businesses lose customers due to a boycott based on identity, or when market areas are forced to shut down entirely due to security risks or curfews, it's not just a statistic on a spreadsheet. It is the destruction of grassroots local economies that are built around cultural exchange and interdependence.
So the disruption of a major festival in just one city can ripple out to thousands of families who are counting on that week's income to survive.
Precisely. And the tourism aspect just compounds this. India sells an image of vibrant, colorful, diverse culture to the world. That image is its brand strength.
But if that global brand is increasingly replaced by media images of tension, stone pelting, and instability,
Both global and domestic tourism suffers dramatically. When festivity is replaced by fear, the financial distress compounds, especially on the historical communities whose very identity and economy are intrinsically linked to the hosting of these major events.
the source material synthesizes all of these effects, the psychological, the social, the economic, into a really grim societal progression. What is that progression, and why is it defined as the real cultural tragedy?
The grim progression is clear, and it's a 3-step process. Society moves from celebration right arrow to confrontation right arrow to segregation.
Celebration, confrontation, segregation.
And the source calls this the real tragedy because segregation is the complete failure of the civilizational ideal. Once communities stop celebrating together and instead start fighting or asserting dominance, the logical and tragic conclusion is withdrawal.
They retreat into their own bubbles.
They inevitably choose to retreat into separate, hostile enclaves, separate neighborhoods, separate market zones, separate social spheres.
And that retreat, that deliberate segregation, signifies the final, painful end of shared cultural space. It proves that the culture failed to uphold that principle we started with, plurality with dignity.
It does. Segregation is the physical manifestation of an internal ideological collapse.
Moving to Section 3, we hit a truly baffling point. The irony of Indians abroad, or what the source terms the global contrast.
This part's fascinating.
We see this stark, almost unbelievable discrepancy between the anxiety of celebrating publicly in India and the open, even proud freedom of celebration enjoyed by the Indian diaspora globally.
This paradox is extraordinarily illuminating because, as the text argues, it completely strips away the notion that these conflicts are somehow inherently rooted in the religions or the traditions themselves.
Oh, so.
Well, if they were inherent to the faiths, the diaspora would be having the same problems in London or New York or Sydney. They're not. The contrast highlights that the conflicts are fundamentally contextual, political, and localized to the environment within India.
So let's look at the evidence the source provides regarding these overseas celebrations. It notes that Indian communities living abroad in the US, UK, Canada, the Middle East, Australia, they often celebrate their Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Christian, and Jain festivals with a level of openness and confidence that is often missing back home.
The examples are vivid and they are compelling. I mean, consider the scale of Diwali parades in New York or Toronto. They are massive, multi-community civic events that draw broad political and social support.
They're part of the city's calendar.
Exactly. Or think about the Ganesh festivals that thrive in places like Dubai, operating successfully within a radically different but stable religious and legal landscape. Eid gatherings in London, or Christmas celebrations flourishing across the entire global Indian diaspora. These events are not secretive or defensive, they are assertions of pride.
And the key realization the source hammers home here is that in these foreign contexts, identity becomes culture, not conflict.
Yes.
They are free to celebrate the entirety of their heritage, the food, the music, the public display, without the constant gnawing fear of internal domestic hostility.
That is the critical distinction. When the diaspora organizes a massive, vibrant cultural event in a foreign city, they are often embraced as contributing to the cultural richness of that new land. They are seen as an asset. The text specifically states, nobody stops them or tells them, your festival is a problem. The identity marker that might invite hostility or legal complexity in the country of origin in the foreign land becomes a source of shared pride. This environment of security and openness they experience abroad just underscores the depth of the tragedy happening back home.
I find that assertion surprising, though. Is the source suggesting that the celebration is only successful abroad because the diaspora is somehow disconnected from the domestic political realities back in India? Is this cultural freedom sustainable if they don't face the original conflicts?
That's a really thoughtful, probing question. The source doesn't argue they are disconnected from politics, but rather that the context is fundamentally different. Abroad, their right to public celebration is often protected by robust, neutral legal institutions that have no political incentive to leverage their differences.
They're protected by the law of the land.
A law that affirms cultural freedom as a fundamental right for everyone. In India, the problem is not a lack of legal rights on paper, but the failure of institutions to enforce those rights impartially, particularly when political incentives favor conflict over harmony.
So the diaspora is celebrating with dignity because they feel secure, whereas the celebration in the country of origin is now laced with anxiety and vulnerability.
Exactly.
The conflict is less about the faith itself and more about the failure of the political and social environment to contain and manage difference.
Absolutely. The diaspora celebration acts as a powerful mirror, showing us what is truly possible when cultural expression is treated as a national asset rather than our political liability. It proves that the conflicts are not an inherent flaw in these ancient traditions. They are a direct symptom of a fractured political and social environment that has actively chosen conflict over coexistence.
It's a tragic irony, then, that many in the diaspora feel freer to be fully Indian abroad than they might at home. Now we have to move from the symptoms and the paradoxes to the causes. Section 4 is titled Unpacking the Root Causes of Fragmentation, and the source material rightly insists that this fragmentation did not happen spontaneously. It's the result of compounding structural factors. We have to look at the mechanisms of decline.
This section requires deep exploration because it identifies the areas where the social fabric was deliberately weakened, allowing these fractures to occur. The source identifies 3 interconnected and mutually reinforcing areas:
Which are?
digital and media influence, political drivers, and a kind of philosophical erosion.
Okay, let's dedicate significant time to the digital and media influence, which the source describes as a powerful accelerant. The text specifically highlights the role of echo chambers on social media and selective narratives dominating news debates.
The digital echo chamber is not merely a social inconvenience. It is an optimized machine for ideological purification. It thrives on confirmation bias.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the algorithms are designed to prioritize engagement. And what generates more engagement than outrage? If you harbor a little suspicion about another community, the algorithm will not show you moderating views. It will feed you an endless stream of content, often the most extreme and decontextualized, that validates and intensifies that suspicion.
It makes moderation and nuance functionally impossible within those sealed informational environments.
It does. The technology financially rewards extremism, and this is compounded by selective narratives in traditional news.
Right, because traditional media often operates on similar outrage metrics.
It does. When news selectively amplifies conflict, exaggerates points of tension, and minimizes or completely ignores moments of genuine harmony and coexistence, it fundamentally warps the perception of reality for the average citizen. If the only time you hear about another community is when they are involved in a clash, you begin to believe their entire identity is defined by hostility.
And this leads directly to the danger of amplifying hate videos and outrage clips, which the source calls the viral fuel of instantaneous conflict.
These clips are meticulously engineered. They are short, visually shocking, always decontextualized, and designed purely for maximum emotional impact and virality.
They bypass the rational mind.
Completely. They trigger an immediate, visceral reaction: anger, fear, resentment. They essentially replace thoughtful deliberation with reflexive emotional warfare.
And because they are so easily shared within the echo chambers.
They effectively become the primary, most accessible narrative about the other group. This overrides decades of lived experience, local friendships, and neighborly trust. The digital interaction, which is often based on anonymous hostility, replaces the face-to-face interaction, which is based on mutual familiarity. That transition is devastating for a diverse society.
Okay, now we have to look at the political drivers. The source uses a very precise and sharp phrase here: political opportunism disguised as cultural protection. This is a strong claim.
It is a strong claim.
What evidence does the text offer to support the idea that the motivation is purely opportunistic?
Well, the source argues that if the primary goal were truly cultural protection, political action would focus on strengthening existing legal frameworks, promoting cultural education, and punishing violence impartially, regardless of who commits it.
But that's not what's happening.
Instead, the focus is on mobilizing public sentiment through division. Opportunism, in this context, means leaders are using cultural and religious identity anxieties as a potent shield to pursue power. Cultural protection, therefore, becomes a marketable political commodity that must be continuously renewed through manufactured grievance.
And the mechanism for renewal, the source notes, is the constant reopening of historical wounds instead of focusing on healing.
Historical wounds, by their nature, are complicated, they're deep, and they're deeply emotional. But political opportunists are not seeking historical understanding or reconciliation. They seek historical leverage.
What do you mean by leverage?
They simplify complex past injustices, events that happened decades or even centuries ago, into current actionable grievances, ensuring that the population is permanently oriented toward conflict rather than consensus.
That sounds incredibly draining for a society. It means a significant portion of the national energy is spent just relitigating the past rather than building a shared future.
That is the tragic result. Healing requires acknowledgement, forgiveness, and crucially, letting go of the constant need for retribution. This political strategy demands a perpetual, vivid memory of conflict, because that memory is the fuel for mobilization. They are systematically preventing the creation of a shared national future narrative.
But perhaps the most crucial driver of this decline is what the source calls philosophical erosion. It states that society stopped learning philosophy and started arguing propaganda. That's a powerful assessment of an intellectual breakdown.
It is the death of critical inquiry and ethical grounding. Philosophy, particularly in the Indian civilizational context, means learning ethical conduct, dharma, understanding the nature of reality, and developing practical principles for harmonious living.
It's about asking questions.
Yes. Propaganda, however, is a simplification machine. It provides ready-made, emotionally charged answers that discourage independent thought and destroy the capacity for critical self-reflection.
And what were the foundational civilizational values that were forgotten or actively suppressed by this shift? The text lists four: Dharma, Karuna, Samvad, Sa-existence.
These are not just academic concepts, they are the essential operating system for a complex, diverse civilization. Dharma is righteous conduct, the moral framework that mandates ethical action even toward your opponent.
Okay.
Karuna is compassion and mercy, absolutely necessary for treating your neighbor with humanity, even when you fundamentally disagree. Sa-existence is the practical acknowledgement that living side by side is not an option, but a necessity.
And the last one, Samvad.
Samvad dialogue is the commitment to engaging, listening, and seeking mutual understanding, even across the deepest divides. When these foundational ethics are replaced by the simplistic rhetoric of propaganda, the system inevitably crashes and fragmentation becomes the predictable outcome.
So this is not an accidental fragmentation at all. It's the result of weaponizing history, optimizing digital spaces for outrage, and fundamentally forgetting the ethical backbone of the culture. This brings us to Section 5, which highlights perhaps the most painful truth in the source material: the silence of institutions and abandonment of justice. This is about the official and institutional response, or often the shocking lack thereof when these conflicts break out.
The source addresses a core failure of those who are meant to uphold order and balance. It states clearly that when mobs damage property, when processions are attacked, and when fear spreads through neighborhoods, the response from authorities and key leadership is often described as slow, cautious, biased, or sometimes completely silent.
That silence, as we established earlier, is never neutral. It sends a potent, corrosive message to everyone involved.
It absolutely does. The failure to respond swiftly and impartially is effectively an act of institutional abandonment. When justice is slow, cautious, or absent, it communicates three destructive ideas simultaneously.
What are they?
First, to the victims, it says that their security and cultural freedom are not a priority. Second, to the aggressors, it says that their violent behavior carries no swift or proportional consequences.
And third?
And third, to the general population, it says that the law is not a neutral arbiter and will not stand for balance.
I think that third point is the most damaging long-term. The source makes a profound statement about the responsibility of the law. Law is meant to protect culture, not abandon it.
The law protects culture by upholding the principles we discussed: the freedom to practice and celebrate that culture without physical or psychological fear. It protects it by ensuring swift, impartial justice when that freedom is violated.
So if an institution allows cultural expression to be targeted,
Or if it systematically fails to prosecute vandalism and violence, it is essentially abandoning its primary mandate. It is implicitly validating the idea that the right to celebrate is conditional on political approval or the absence of hostile resistance.
and what does this institutional silence create space for? The text says, silence creates space for extremism on all sides.
Extremism is always waiting on the sidelines, but it needs an opportunity. It thrives in a vacuum of justice. When the law is paralyzed or biased, citizens feel compelled to seek justice or protection through non-institutional means.
They take matters into their own hands.
They look to non-state actors, often those with the loudest, most aggressive, and most uncompromising voices, to provide the security or retribution they feel they have been denied by the state apparatus. This instantly escalates cycles of violence and counter-violence, making the job of legitimate institutional intervention even more difficult later on.
It effectively legitimizes vigilantism.
In essence, yes. The source concludes this section with a devastating thesis regarding the mechanism of national decline. A nation does not decline because people become aggressive. A nation declines when institutions stop standing for balance and justice.
That is the essential takeaway for any society facing internal division. Aggression and difference are natural human characteristics and are always present. But a healthy nation is defined by having robust, impartial institutions that act as shock absorbers, impartial arbiters, and firm enforcers of civic order.
And when those institutions fail to enforce balance, when they show clear bias or paralysis in the face of conflict, the foundational stability of the nation erodes. The crisis is not the fact that people are fighting. The crisis is that the system is failing to stop the fighting justly. This institutional failure is what allows the fracture to become permanent.
Section 6 forces us to look forward, outlining the trajectory warning. If the current trend of confrontation, institutional silence, and fragmentation continues, the consequences, as described by the source, are severe and civilizational.
The future described is grim because the very purpose of celebration is inverted. Festivals will no longer be about devotion or humility or shared joy. Instead, they will become displays of power, assertions of pride, and calculated acts of provocation.
That represents a total loss of the spiritual and social function of the festival. If they become about displaying power and provocation, they cease to be acts of culture rooted in faith and become purely acts of political theater, designed to assert dominance.
And the consequence of that transformation is the collapse of the social infrastructure we've been discussing. Society will inevitably fragment further. Trust will collapse entirely. The inherent value of cultural exchange disappears, replaced by a destructive competition for visible dominance in the public sphere.
And the source warns that the world's oldest civilization will, through its own actions, forget the very wisdom that sustained it for thousands of years.
A chilling thought.
It is. We must remind ourselves what that wisdom is by recalling the foundational concepts. This is where we pivot from the problem back to the civilizational solution. The source insists these are not lofty, abstract ideals. They are the essential survival principles for a diverse nation.
And let's dedicate time to grounding these concepts in reality. First, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. This goes far beyond simple tolerance.
How does that translate into a practical operating principle during a time of conflict?
This concept mandates a fundamental ethical position. All human beings are interconnected and share a common destiny. In the context of conflict, it means seeing the person you disagree with, even the person who is acting aggressively, not as an alien enemy, but as a misguided or troubled relative.
It demands a universal compassion.
Yes, one that transcends immediate political or religious boundaries. Critically, it makes aggression against a neighbor an act of self-harm against the larger family unit. If you truly believe the world is your family, you can disagree fiercely, but you cannot destroy the family home.
That's a very high bar for conduct. Next, Sarvadharma Samabhava. All faiths deserve respect.
This is a crucial distinction. Mere tolerance implies enduring something you dislike or disagree with, but you put up with it. Samabhava requires equal respect, a positive affirmation that all paths leading toward the divine or toward ethical truth have inherent intrinsic value.
It's the antidote to religious supremacism.
Exactly. It provides cultural confidence.
Right.
A person confident in their own spiritual path is not threatened by the successful celebration of their neighbor's path.
Then we have the pairing of ahimsa and karuna, disagreement without destruction.
Ahimsa, nonviolence, is the outward rule. It dictates that conflict must never become physical destruction. But paired with karuna, compassion, it provides a functional psychological method for conflict management.
So you can disagree, but you can't destroy.
Disagreement, competition, tension, these are inevitable in a diverse society. But this principle dictates that the disagreement must never justify the physical or spiritual destruction of the opponent. You argue against the idea, but you are morally obligated to protect the dignity of the person holding that idea.
And finally, samvad, dialogue over dominance.
Dialogue, samvad, is an active, disciplined commitment. Dominance seeks to silence, defeat, or eliminate the opposing view. Samvad seeks to understand it, integrate constructive criticism, and find common ground for the sake of societal stability.
In a world of echo chambers, this seems more important than ever.
In a fractured society driven by digital echo chambers and propaganda, samvad means reestablishing the commitment to sit down, listen carefully to intent as well as words, and work toward mutual understanding, rather than simply scoring political points or asserting ideological power. It is the practical tool for resolving differences within that framework of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
And the section concludes with that powerful assertion. Culture is not protected by anger. It is protected by dignity, confidence, and wisdom.
Anger is inherently defensive and destructive. It seeks to immediately lash out. Dignity and confidence, however, are rooted in self-assurance and deep historical grounding. A culture that is truly confident in its thousands-year history does not fear the presence of other cultures. It doesn't need to attack the procession of another community to feel valid.
It's wisdom that enables that.
Yes. Wisdom enables the ethical application of these foundational principles, dharma, karuna, samvada, ensuring that the defense of culture is ethical and constructive, not reactionary and aggressive.
We've identified the sickness, seen the devastating costs, and recalled the ancient antidote. Now in Section 7, the final substantive section, we pivot to what must change a call to citizens. The source material shifts the responsibility firmly back to the individual level.
This is the essential application phase. If institutions are currently failing, if they are paralyzed by bias or silence, then the repair work must start with conscious individual choice and widespread behavioral change.
And the source provides highly practical, actionable mindsets that citizens can adopt right now to halt this slide toward segregation. The first practical step addresses the digital sphere. Stop amplifying outrage clips and hate videos. This is a direct call for digital responsibility.
It's a call for personal editorial control and media hygiene. Every individual holds the power to break the cycle of viral outrage simply by refusing to share, like, or comment on content designed purely to provoke hatred and conflict.
It seems like such a small act.
But by refusing to amplify this content, you are starving the digital echo chamber of the emotional energy it needs to grow. This small personal choice has a massive aggregate societal impact because it limits the toxicity of our shared information environment.
Next, the crucial generational mandate. Teach children the meaning of festivals, not the politics surrounding them.
The core meaning of any great festival, whether it is the victory of light over darkness in Diwali, the message of charity and sacrifice in Eid, or the universal goodwill of Christmas, is ethical and universal.
The politics are not.
The politics that currently surround these areas are transient, divisive, and often hateful. Parents, teachers, and community elders must consciously and rigorously decouple the spiritual ritual from the current political context.
So the next generation inherits the wisdom, not the grievance.
Precisely. They should inherit the underlying ethics of the tradition, not the arguments of the present moment. The goal is to transmit love for one's own tradition without transmitting hatred or fear of the other's tradition.
Another crucial step is holding leaders accountable, but actively resisting letting leaders control our personal emotions. This creates a necessary intellectual and emotional distance between the political class and the individual conscience.
Accountability is a fundamental necessity for a functioning democracy, but emotional independence is necessary for civilizational survival. Leaders often require heightened emotional states, anger, fear, resentment, to mobilize their base and maintain their political grip.
So the citizen's responsibility is to recognize that manipulation.
And to firmly refuse to surrender their personal ethical judgment to political expediency. Your heart must remain wiser and calmer than the narrative being sold to you on the screen or the stage.
That resistance is an act of civic duty and self-preservation.
It is. It's refusing to give your most potent tool, your moral outrage, to someone who will only use it for division.
And finally, the essential ethical standard. Celebrate personal faith without insulting the faith of others.
This is the practical, everyday manifestation of Sarva Dharma Samapaba. Confidence in your own faith does not and should not require the degradation or denigration of someone else's. In fact, true spiritual maturity finds satisfaction and peace in its own practice and is fundamentally unthreatened by the successful practice of others.
The source is very clear on this.
It is. Insulting others' faith is an act of profound insecurity, not strength. It is fundamentally uncivilized behavior that erodes the possibility of future coexistence.
The source provides the perfect summary for this entire segment, reiterating the vision for the future. Festivals must be treated as bridges, not battlegrounds. And India needs wiser hearts, not louder voices.
Battlegrounds demand aggression, dominance, and zero-sum conflict. Bridges require cooperation, mutual passage, and mutual respect for safe transit. A wise heart understands the long game of civilization, prioritizing harmony and stability over temporary ideological victories.
And the louder voices.
The louder voices are currently dominating the public square and drowning out the possibility of samvad. The only enduring hope lies in a quiet, widespread, and ethical resistance to that toxic noise.
As we draw this deep dive to a close, we've traced the transformation of major Indian festivals from cultural unifiers into political flashpoints. We've systematically examined the deep societal costs, the erosion of community trust, the fear injected into the next generation, and the debilitating paralysis of key institutions.
We've explored the irony of the diaspora, who often find cultural freedom abroad that is tragically denied at home, and identified the primary root causes: the algorithmic acceleration of digital echo chambers, the political exploitation of historical wounds, and the profound forgetting of foundational wisdom, like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and the practice of samvad.
The source material leaves us with a powerful reflection. a stark reminder of the monumental inheritance that is currently at risk. It states that India inherited a civilization that thrived for thousands of years. Empires came and went, rulers rose and fell, but the culture survived and flourished because it was rooted in wisdom, compassion, and a radical commitment to harmony.
That survival, as the source insists, was not accidental. It was built on those specific, enduring survival principles we discussed. The real threat, the text warns, is not external armies or foreign influence. Civilizations don't fall from the outside.
They fall from within.
They fall when they turn against themselves and deliberately erode their own foundations of trust. The current crisis is an internal one, a deliberate erosion of harmony fueled by fear and opportunism.
And so, the text leaves us with a final, provocative choice that every listener must face, because the problem is no longer abstract. The real question today is not what is happening to our culture, but a far more personal and immediate one. Will we protect it, or will we destroy it with our own hands?
And the answer is not abstract. The answer is tangible. It is determined by the small, conscious choices you make and how you choose to celebrate or refuse to celebrate the next festival.